Well, Nicole, it is so great to have you here on See Hear Love and as a part of our SOS podcast series, Summer of Strength. And I know without a doubt that you will definitely be strengthening our listeners with your story, your thoughts, your incredible wise thoughts, Nicole.
Thanks, Melinda. I'm excited. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
All right. Now, when I say, Nicole, you're part of our Summer Strength series, your story is going to strengthen us. What comes to mind for you when I say strengthen, or what do you think, before I get into your story, is something that you can encourage our listeners about strengthening them this summer? What would you say from your own personal story? What can you offer that will strengthen them?
Yeah. Wow. That's a great question to kind of launch in with.
Right off the top.
Right off, as I think about my story and where I found my strength was obviously my strength comes from the Lord. And so in the summer is a great opportunity to just be spending some time outside and just be noticing where He is and who He is. But let me tell you that I have this thing I call God-isms. And the God-isms are the fingerprints that I notice in my life. And because sometimes, especially if for me in different times of my life, I have felt very, very alone. But when I'm noticing God's fingerprints in my life, that definitely kind of bolsters. It brings strength. And so summer is a great time to do that, to just get outside and just be noticing where He's showing up.
Favorite place to vacation visit be? Anywhere in the world?
Yeah. So I love Europe, and I love Greece, and we're heading there. We're heading there in the fall, actually. So that would definitely be my one of my favorites for sure. And Canada's pretty fantastic too. So
thank you for saying that. Like I lived in Asia, Nicole, traveled all over the world, love Europe. I mean, my husband and I a few years ago went to Italy, which was a dream for 2 weeks. So Italy was amazing, and I always wanted to drive down the Amalfi Coast, and so we rented a car, and it was like magical. Loved it. I love Greece, Santorini. It's beautiful. But Canada, I love Canada. I think just this country from like coast to coast to coast. You go from like British Columbia, like BC, West, all the way to the East Coast, which I love. My parents had a cottage there for years in Nova Scotia. And then all the way up, I've been to the Yukon. And then out in Ontario, and I've been to like all the provinces, and I think I just haven't been to Newfoundland. I've been to all the East Coast provinces, and then I haven't been to Nunavut and the Northwest Territories, but everywhere else. But I'm just saying, Canada is beautiful. I tell all Canadians, you've got to discover this country.
Yes, and what a blessing to live in a place that's so diverse, from the West Coast to the East Coast, all from the landscape and the topography to even the cultures, and it's just a fantastic place to explore.
I love it. What's your favorite city or area in Canada? What'd you say?
Okay, so I lived in British Columbia for 27 years, so I have to admit there's just something really special about BC, and I love the island. I love Sook, and Tofino over there is fantastic. And but last summer, my husband and I were up on our motorcycles in the Yukon, and wow, right? So we sat up there. Yeah, it's just it's ridiculous up there. It's just so beautiful.
Yeah, I love that. I worked in just north of the BC border, in Watson Lake, Yukon, where they have the famous signs that you put up. I worked there 2 summers, and I visited Whitehorse, and then I went up all the way to Dawson City.
Good.
And then from the Dawson City, we drove up to top of the World Highway, and went on there. And then I saw the most gorgeous northern lights ever in the Yukon. Like, it was so magical. Like the drive, the people, the landscape. Like Dawson City was really fun. We camped out. My girlfriend and I. We took up her pickup truck, 2 girls, and like camped on some island outside of Dawson City. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, it was kind of crazy. But anyway, it was just fun summer working. I worked at the local hotel dining room. I worked as a grocery girl at the Super A. I
Wow.
worked in a mining recorder's office, staking gold claims for businesses. Oh yeah, it was crazy. It's like 2 summers I did like all kinds of things to make money, but the experience was
Wow.
amazing.
Well, and it is just its own culture up there. We spent a few days in Dawson City, and then
Okay.
we went to the Arctic Circle on the bikes. But we have to take this just this nutty highway, the Dempster Highway, which is a dirt
Yes.
road,
Yes.
but at the top of the Dempster Highway is this tiny little place called Eagle Plains, and I think it's the last stop for truckers before they get to Northwest Territories. And we stayed
Yeah.
there. We stayed there for a night, and I'll tell you what, it was a hotel, a little restaurant, a gas station, and that was it. And you could see forever from the top of this,
It's
Dempster Highway.
amazing.
And you just feel, and because the sun doesn't set, right? You just
Hmm.
feel like you're in a totally different part of the world, and a
Yeah.
totally different, almost like on the moon, almost.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting experience. Wow,
I
you
don't
have
hear, yeah, I
done
don't hear
it
too many people,
all.
Nicole, talk about the Yukon. So that's really like amazing because yeah, they'll say like I've been to BC and maybe northern BC, but a lot of people don't keep going up to the
Yeah.
Yukon. So if Yukon tourism is listening, Nicole and I would love to be
Oh,
ambassadors. Yukon
that's right.
tourism, listen.
We're waving the flag. We're
Yeah,
waving the
exactly.
flag.
Give us a
Yeah.
call. All right, so Nicole, you said that you were in BC for 27 years, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
And now you're in Ontario. Let's talk
Yeah.
about your story because a lot of the themes of your story are about, rejection, betrayal and recovery and reclaiming the truth, which are all things that I love, and I know that a lot of our audience are in that same place, have been, are working
Mm.
through, because those are some of those topics that we've talked about a lot on See Her Love. So I'd love to hear your
Mm.
story and what you've learned along the way.
Mm. Well, I grew up here in Ontario, and when I was a young adult, when I was about 20, I got a little bit of the bug for BC. The Dixie Chicks were playing loud at the Go West, kind of story. And so, um, and so off I went, and I built a life out there. I got married. I have a daughter, and I went through university. I got my undergraduate, my graduate degree, and then I opened a practice in Abbotsford. And that was my home. I had church family, friends, a practice, and I felt like that was my community. I'd come back here several times a year, obviously, to visit my family here and the people here, but it was where I felt very much at home. And in 2016, my husband of almost 20 years announced that he was done. He was done with our marriage. He was done with our life together. And I was absolutely shocked.
Mm.
And it turns out that there had been some behind the scenes things happening that I was unaware of. And the blind side of it rocked me at my core. And it catapulted me into the deepest valley of my life. I call the valley of rejection, the valley of betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
And I just face planted in that valley. I didn't see it coming. And here's the thing, I was a therapist, right? So I'm a
Mm-hmm.
therapist. I have a practice in Barrie. I had a practice in Abbotsford. But you don't see what you're not looking for. And
Mm-hmm.
right under my nose, there were some things happening that were definitely not in line with our marriage and our
Mm-hmm.
family. And so, with his decision to leave the family, that left me with a bit of a choice to make around how things were going to go now. What are the next seasons that I'm going to with that chapter ending? And when you get kicked out of your favorite club, the wife club is my favorite club, and I had gotten kicked out of it, and I felt like my identity was kind of pulled out from underneath of me, and I didn't really know who I was. And the ripple effect of divorce and loss, of course, as with many losses, is that you lose friendships, people pick sides. Being unchosen is its own kind of pain. And
Mm-hmm.
so I really kind of sat in the ripple effect of that. I took myself at one point, about a year later, I decided, okay, God, so what am I doing here? What am I doing? Where am I going? Am I staying in British Columbia? Am I moving back to Ontario? And I took myself on a little retreat, and I really felt God saying, it's time to move. And so I closed my practice, and I moved back to Ontario. My daughter came with me, and so we've set up a practice here, and I've set up a practice here, and I'm remarried to Brent, and everything is beautiful. But I have to tell you, that valley, I still have scars from that valley, and I still have I still carry some of the things that are left over from that time, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful at this time to be still feeling connected to that season of my life, because it was there that I felt the most loved. God rushed right in hard on me during that valley and taught me all kinds of things, which is where this book was birthed. So that's kind of where the book came from, was that valley of rejection.
That isn't, I'm nodding a lot, Nicole, because some of these words and experiences were like what I felt when I went through my own divorce, and when my, ex-husband, just out of the blue one day just said, I don't want to be married to you anymore.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing is, and I was writing some notes as I'm listening to, is, and I think you said it so well, is being unchosen. We all want to be chosen. We want to be chosen for the dodgeball game. We want to be chosen to be on the right soccer team. We want to be chosen for the baseball team. When the leader comes up and they choose you and they're picking sides. And so being chosen is, I think, really at the core and desire for us. And when you are unchosen, so many feelings of rejection and unworthiness and shame, and a lot of shame from yourself, more so sometimes than from others, come in. And so I want to ask you that, because there are some people I know that are still in that place, and it's so hard to get out of, like the shame and rejection, because they've now made that an identity, and they just can't untangle from it because they've been so hurt.
Right. Yeah.
What would you say to that? Because I know a few that are still there, and I know there's a lot of listeners that are, and they're like, we're not on the other side yet. We're still there.
Yeah, it is. That valley is, well, I say that's actually God's workbench, right? And so there we are, we're face down in the valley, rejection, betrayal, that feeling of worthlessness, being unchosen. It can absolutely wreak havoc in our identity, because we are built for connection. We're built for belonging. We are built for being chosen. That's how God's created us. And so when it happens, when we experience rejection, it absolutely, it really rattles our identity. And so what I really kind of came to in that valley was, actually, God's chosen me. He's, not only has he chosen me, he's woven me together. He's pulled all the pieces together to create me, and he pursues me every single moment of every single day. I'm so chosen by him, actually, that he was willing to, give up his son. Jesus came down, pursued me on the cross. And so there's this thing that happened to me when I really understood that when I'm chosen by the King of the universe, it doesn't, the fact that some human being unchose me doesn't get to land the same way. When I compare it up against the truth of what is actually true, it doesn't get to land the same way. And so my identity has to be connected to who God says I am. And that, it sounds a little bit like Christianese a little bit, and it's risky to say it out loud, but when you're in that spot and you're like, okay, well, what is my identity rooted in? Because the opinions of others they're kind of fleeting. They're fickle, really. And but God's opinion isn't fickle. It's solid. It's rooted in his love for us, and we're made in his image. And so when I really let myself believe what he says about us, then I was able to see my identity not as someone's wife, or not as a divorced woman, right? Because you spend some time thinking you're wearing this scarlet letter.
Yeah.
And my identity is in Jesus alone. He knows the truth. He knows me. He sees me. He chooses me every second of every day. And when that identity got a hold of me, things started to change for me.
I think that is a good lesson for us to think about and process, like after people listen to this podcast, to kind of go away and think about that, because so much of our identity and worth is based on what other people think of us, what other people say about us, and our own thoughts. I mean, a lot of like self-condemnation happened with me, you know, when you're sitting alone
Yes.
or you're in the fetal position, and then it all
Yeah.
comes on you, and you're like, I'm just speaking like words of like unkindness and hatred over me, and you just can't get
Yes.
out of it. It's like, why
Yeah.
would he leave me? Am I so horrible that he would
Awful. Yeah.
leave and do that? Am I such a horrible wife? Was I not
Mm.
enough? Like, and it just keeps piling and piling and piling and
Yes.
piling. And then
Yeah.
I really had to
Heavy.
figure out, yeah, it was heavy. And I had to really figure out how to speak kindly to myself and to give space from that and actually look at things really objectively on what was going on and be honest
So
about
good.
my
Yeah.
response. But like I had to be really
Yes.
honest, Nicole, about, you know, the demise of my marriage. There was responsibility on my part. In some areas, it
Yes.
became really clear when I went to my therapist. There was
Yeah.
very clear things on his part. And I think when I
Yeah.
owned my part and worked on that, that changed everything. And I think as a better woman and wife and partner
Mm-hmm.
now to Chris, but man, that was a journey. That was not an overnight thing.
No, healing is the real deal. Like it
Yes.
absolutely is a process. And I'm so glad that you mentioned the words that you speak to yourself. As a therapist, I talk to women all the time about what are the words you're saying to yourself
Mm,
about yourself. We have to be
yeah.
so careful with our language to ourselves. And one of the things I ask women to often do when they come in and they're heaping these words of shame on
Yeah.
themselves, as I say, okay, so let's write down these words. What are the messages that you're saying
Hmm.
to yourself about yourself? We put them on a piece of paper, and I'll say, okay, so I want you to think of someone you love in your life, a child you love in your life. Would you say these words to them? And of course not, right? You think of your
Hmm.
child, and you say these awful words to them. Of course not. Well, why is that? Well, because it would hurt them, and it would harm them, and it would have a long-term effect on them.
Hmm.
Yes, the same is true for us. We need to be heaping life-giving words onto ourselves, instead of the berating that we often find ourselves doing.
Hmm.
And that's a shift. That's a really difficult shift when you've been rejected or unchosen or betrayed, and you're spending a lot of time just spinning in a cycle of what is wrong with me. And we collect material to prove that there's something wrong with us, when we need to be reminding ourselves that actually this is what God says about you. You're
Hmm.
chosen, you're pursued, you're wanted, you're adored, you're all of the things.
Hmm.
Um, and he says that we're enough.
Hmm. That's so good.
The language counts. So good.
Yeah. What was the process for you, Nicole, um, in forgiveness? Because I wanted to hold
Mm.
on to all the rights I had to be angry at him and not forgive him
Yeah.
because this is what he did, right? I mean, I went through that phase. Like, I
Yeah.
withheld all kinds of love, forgiveness. I didn't even use those words. I shunned those words from my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm
Oh.
like, no, he doesn't deserve that. He is unworthy of that for me to give.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a long process for me, you
Mm.
know. And there's still moments like I'm like, but for you, how? Because I think with a child, like I didn't have any kids coming in or
Mm.
leaving, you know, the marriage. You had a child, like you know, what
Mm.
what was that process like for you? The forgiveness journey.
Oh wow, that is a big. That's a big journey. So forgiveness is not a one and done. I'm sure,
No.
just like you said, which
Yeah.
is so exactly right. We have this sense of like there's like this moment where we're like, I'm unforgiving, and now I'm forgiving, and that is not the way that it works at all. Forgiveness is a process. It's a
Hmm.
decision. I write in my book, about forgiveness, and one of the things I really want to be able to say is I forgive because God forgives me, and I couldn't get my head around that. I couldn't. What had happened was wrong. It was
Hmm.
not okay. I was justifiably angry. This was not okay, and I had been the victim of a very bad thing, like yourself. And I didn't want to forgive because it felt like that was letting him off the hook, and I didn't want to let him off the hook because he deserved to be squarely on the hook.
Yes.
And so I wanted to hold on to that, but I also wanted freedom. I wanted joy. I wanted peace. I didn't want to
Mm.
spin in the way that it felt to be unforgiving. So I was really grateful. I love it when God shares like little kind of messages with us when we're in our devotions, and I felt Him say, "It hurts my feelings. It hurts my feelings when you don't forgive." And
Hmm.
I was like, "Oh, I do not want to do that. I do not want to hurt
Hmm.
His feelings." Um, I don't want to hurt the feelings of the men who dove into that valley with me and rescued me from myself, from the pain. I didn't want to hurt him. I confess I did want my ex-partner to hurt, but it wasn't even about him, because forgiveness isn't about the other person. Forgiveness is about me being in line with who God has called me to be. And so when I thought of sitting across the table from Jesus and saying, no, I'm not going to forgive him, and his face saying, this hurts my feelings, I would do anything to not hurt his feelings, right? So I was like, I'm going to forgive. I'm going to begin the process of forgiveness because I don't want to hurt your feelings, God. Not because of anything else, just that. And then that became a daily decision. And part of the thing that shows up for me is that if I pray for someone, it's hard to hold anger towards them. So someone had suggested I start praying for him, and that was its own interesting little thing.
Yes,
so
I got that too, and I was like, no.
I don't.
The first I heard that, I was like,
yeah.
No, I'll pray for everything else. I'll pray for the weather.
Right. Yeah.
I'll pray for all the people I don't know overseas and other places. But I'm not.
But not him.
No, exactly, not him. He doesn't deserve it. He doesn't deserve my prayers.
He doesn't deserve prayers. I know, and I actually told the person who suggested. I said, can you stop talking? Please stop talking. I don't know why you thought that was a good idea to say that to me, but anyways, so eventually though, in my softening towards God, because God loves him, and I just needed to follow the prompting in my heart around the Holy Spirit. So from the Holy Spirit. So I let God take the wheel, right? I was like, okay, I don't know how to do this forgiveness. It's too big. It's bigger than me. I don't know how to forgive, but I'm going to follow your lead, and I don't want to hurt your feelings. And so I started to journal. I started to research forgiveness. I started to every day just decide that when I was having unforgiveness feelings, I would say, here you go, Lord, I'm choosing to forgive today. And I would focus on something different, because we can get spinning in the resentment and the bitterness, what that resentment brings, or that unforgiveness brings, right? And so, kind of trying to continually give over is a process. And then when we see our children hurting, you're like, I got to forgive all over again. I got to do this again, right? So like there's multiple layers to forgiveness. And so we have to be patient with ourselves and gracious with ourselves. And if you need help from a Christian counselor, access a Christian counselor to work through some of that forgiveness piece, because the freedom on the other side of it is worth the work. So good.
Another just light question for you, Nicole, because we're just going light and surface.
We're going light.
Just surface. No, I know. Get ready. So I've gotten this question a number of times. Now that, you're remarried, I'm remarried. There's a number of women and men I know who are like, when do you know you're ready to go and get married or be in another relationship? Like, for some reason in the church, it's like a 3-year, I don't know where that came from, but you're okay after 3 years to start dating or get married again. But anything less than that, and I'm saying 3 but somewhere there are people that create these like timelines for people, and then if it's too soon, like, oh my goodness, you're now dating and getting married in a year, it's like, oh my gosh, it's so soon. And then if it's like way too long, people are like, are you scared? What's wrong with you? Like, get back in the dating pool, right? What would you say for you would maybe be markers of when you realized you were ready to open your heart again and begin a new relationship? Because I had to do the same thing, and my story is really different in that we met, but it took us a long time until we got married, and it was just because Chris had children, and I didn't want to marry a pastor at the time, a worship leader, or anybody with kids, and he was all 3 and more. I didn't want him to, like, I'm not even joking. And I said that to my therapist, and she put it on a board, and then when she met me a while later, when I was starting to date Chris, she brought out the board, which I'm like, why do you do that? And then she puts all the things I said no to, which actually were the things that I actually were deeply things that I love. I love a pastoral heart, someone who loves theology. The kids have really opened myself into a different way of life and understanding and love. Anyway, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I get this question a lot, and I've had from quite a number of viewers who've asked me, when do you know you're ready and what's a healthy time to then open yourself up again?
Oh yeah, I get that question a lot too. I think it's a great question, and I mean, I would love to hear how you knew what were the markers for you.
Yeah. I think the first thing was as soon as I was on the market, quote unquote, I will be honest, I was terrified, and it didn't help that there were guy friends of mine that all of a sudden started acting not as friends anymore.
Right.
And there are people
Yes.
and I'm in Christian ministry, Nicole. So there were people that kind of like went like wildfire around the Christian ministry world.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
getting people that were all kinds of men trying to connect with me over Facebook and stuff, which really scared me. Like I actually then kind of like, I actually stopped going to church and other things. I didn't want to be seen by people because people kept asking me, or I was just getting, I know, men were just kind of coming up to me and it just was getting crazy. So I hid, which for a year, I'll be honest, I lied about where I was at. I didn't tell anybody I was separated. Like there was a lot of things. Like when I think back about just how wounded I was and how I protected myself. And I met Chris, and here's what's so funny. At an event where I didn't want to go to, I was not even looking for a relationship. I was like so not there. I'd gone through good therapy. I felt good. I still felt a little wounded. I think you do. But I was just like not even there. And it was he came up to me, and I'm pretentious, really chill. Didn't even know I was in Christian TV. Didn't know. Then this is what I did love, Nicole. He didn't know anything about me. He didn't know that I was on TV, that I had a podcast show or a radio show, like none of that. He didn't know. And I think that was one part, because in the line of work that I am, a lot of people want to kind of be in this world. So I had a lot of people, a lot of men that knew me, had watched me, try to reach out. But Chris had no idea, which was so refreshing. And then I don't know what it was. A kindness to him, a gentleness. He was so open and knelt down to listen to me, and I all of a sudden it was like I opened up. It was like I didn't feel afraid. I immediately trusted him, which was weird because my heart was very locked.
Yeah.
And he was kind of, I will say too, Nicole, he was outside of my world, like sort of the evangelical world. He was actually a United Church minister, so he actually lived in the mainline world where I was in this sort of like evangelical world. And that's why there was no connection, which I loved. And I loved that he wasn't gaga over me in that way. I loved that he was just chill. And there's so many things. And I think, I don't know, I think it, because I'm glad you asked me that, because when I think about it, it's like I just opened, and because I was so closed and so hurt. And it felt like he could be trusted. And it was slow though, like we dated and really slow, and then he had kids, and he didn't want me to meet his kids for at least a year until we knew. And so for a whole year it was like we just dated without the kids, and we kind of just took our time, and we were still going to therapy separately.
Yeah, good.
But then I knew, then and I know I'm asking you the question, I'm kind of like trying to articulate it, and it's like it's hard, but
it's good. It sounds like he had such good wisdom too in that, and I think that helps as well. But I remember I remember sliding off my chair onto my floor in the middle of a panic attack one day. This is still living in Abbotsford before I'd moved back to Ontario, and I was having a panic attack. I didn't know what else to do, so I put my Bible on my face, and I just like was pleading with God to just heal me. Can you just heal me? And when I was able to kind of gain my breath again, I cried out to him. I was like, God, I do not know how I'm ever going to trust a man again. How do I ever trust a man again? And I felt in my heart him say, you don't need to worry about that right now. You just need to trust me. And so, because Melinda, what you're saying is exactly right. It was open season, right? Like you're talking about, it's like there's this like information that somebody's single, and now all of a sudden it's like open season. My friend Debbie says, it's like open season on you. What the heck is going on, right? So you feel like, okay, so I've been betrayed, I've been rejected. I don't trust men, and now there's this influx of potential problems.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Right.
I do not want anything to do with y'all, right? I just want
Yeah.
you. Can you just forget about me, right? And so I was quite guarded too. Just what you're saying is exactly right. I was so guarded, and I was mad at the whole gender. I was mad, right? And so I really had to work through that. That was part of the healing that needed to happen for me. And so for me, what the markers were, if I'm thinking about it, as you're speaking, I think we're probably, maybe some similarities here, is that I started to identify less with what had happened to me and more with where I was going.
Good.
And
That's really
so
good.
that was a pivot point for me, where I had, I often say you can't wave the victim flag and the victor flag at the same time. So I had to choose. I had to put one down. And I admit that because something bad had happened and I felt very ripped off, and my whole life had changed. I lost my membership in my favorite club, and the rumors and the things that happened. I was waving this victim flag because I was justified in it, and I was very attached to that. This was wrong, and it was very wrong. But when I lost some of my identity to my victim identity and started to kind of hold on to that victory identity, that's when I started to notice I just felt different. And when I would think about the pain, it wouldn't evoke an emotion from me.
Yeah.
And so I started to just notice that my response to the pain was different. And I felt further from the pain and the trauma and more connected to the forward movement. So that was when I knew that there was potential for healing and trust again, right? And similar to you, God brought me someone that I could trust, and there was all these different things that showed up long before anything moved in that direction that were things I needed that I didn't even know I needed in order to kind of secure healing on the trauma side of things. And I don't know about you, but at the front end of trauma, we often have dreams. We have, different smells, different noises, different places we go evoke emotions and feelings. And when those things are still there, it's maybe not quite time to move forward just yet. There needs to be some healing in those areas. And when I noticed those were shifting for me, it felt like I was freed up a little bit to move forward.
How did you meet your husband now?
Okay. My husband was my first boyfriend. He was the first man I was ever in love with. It's nuts. We grew up in the same youth group, and I was in love with him from the time I was 14 to 16. There's evidence of it. I have a book of poetry and letters I've written to him. It's a binder. It's traveled the world with me, this binder. And I practiced my signature when I was 14 years old.
No.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we dated for a few months until he decided I was too young for him. I'm actually 4 years younger than him, and so at the time it was quite a large age difference, Yeah. And so now it's not from his perspective, but I'm the younger one. Anyway.
Right.
But so anyway, so that changed. So that relationship came to an end. He went on in his life, and I moved out to British Columbia shortly after, a couple of years later, I guess. And then through a series of events, so our families are very, very good friends and have always been really good friends. And small town stuff, and same church. We used to do family Christmases together when we were, as teenagers. And so, it's a very, very long story, but the bottom line is we're just naturally came back together on this side of things.
That's incredible. So, I mean, okay, not how many years, because then we could be like, okay, well, how old are we? But that's incredible. Like, you knew each other in your teen years, and then as adults, you end up marrying after two other marriages ended.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yes. And the there's Brent and I have very different stories. Brent lost his wife to cancer and has and traveled that journey in their marriage. He had a wonderful relationship with his wife, and I honor that and respect that and value that very much. And so he coming into a relationship with me, his I say baggage, but you know what I mean. It's not really baggage for both of us. We come in with different things into the relationship. I have trust issues. He doesn't. and he's just steady. He's just ready to kind of just honor my process and recognize that I've got some things that I've shown up with that sometimes flare up, still. So,
Yeah.
and he's just been so just gentle and gracious with me. So
Amazing.
yeah, it's amazing to me. I often say, like, God gave me my first love back, and what a beautiful gift to
That's
me.
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Blended family. I'm always, that's another thing. I've done a couple shows on blended family. Now, for me, again, like I said, I didn't bring any children into the marriage, but Chris has two, Sophie and Nathan. Sophie's now 15. Nathan will be almost 18. But that's been a big topic for a number of people because the family unit is looking very different than it was years ago. When people said, oh, the family, mom, dad, 2 kids, or 3 kids and a dog, that there's been no divorce, there's no bonus parents, right? But now, families look so different. So different. What would your encouragement be, Nicole, to those that may be struggling in blended family? Either at the beginning, they're just entering, it's in the middle, they're in it, and well, maybe not say end, but you know what I mean, like in it, because there's a lot of other challenges with that. I mean, every family has challenges, but there's additional, I believe, challenges within a blended family context.
Yeah, you are so right about that. The blended family dynamic is really challenging, and I struggled at it, and I think that Brent and I both were honest about some of the struggles that we have. So between the two of us, we have 3 adult children, and and so it's a little bit different because we weren't coming in with small children into our home, which I think is a different dynamic altogether. But these children had all 3 of them had experienced considerable amount of trauma, just in different ways, and so you lose a parent to death, very traumatic. You lose a parent to divorce, very traumatic. And so, we're bringing in our own leftover stuff, and we're also bringing in the children's leftover stuff. And they didn't ask for this, right? This isn't the thing that they want. And so we feel, our children we're asking them to be very, very adaptable. So patience is really important. And that can be really hard because we're like, let's just move forward with this. Let's everybody be happy and kumbaya. Yeah. And that is not the way that it usually goes at first, for sure. And one of the things I found in my devotions, I was having a little bit of a bad attitude, and I was wrestling with God around some of the struggles I have with my story. I'm like, I don't know that this is the story that I really wanted, God. If you could, some of the, and there's some challenges in adapting to this new life. And in my devotions one morning, I felt him ask me this really important question. I heard him say, can I trust you with whom and what I've entrusted to you? And, I was kind of taken aback by it because I felt like maybe my bad attitude had brought on this question. But it definitely changed my perspective a little bit, in that if I believe I'm supposed to be with Brent, then that means I also have a very important role in the lives of his kids, and vice versa. And so I believe that God's given this man to me, and that means he's supposed to be part of my daughter's life, and I'm supposed to be part of his children's life, and that's a high responsibility, and God doesn't take this lightly. And so I have to be trustworthy with his kids. And that was a perspective shift for me a little bit around, okay, these aren't, the challenges are here. I have to do this well. I have to honor God's trust and what he's asking me to do. And that can be really, really hard. So, patience and prayer and having open communication with your partner and talking to outside sources like a good Christian counselor around how do we integrate well, developing individual relationships, not necessarily depending on the age of the children, but I was just wanting to be friends in a sense, right? Like I'm not your mom. I just want to be someone who can care about you and love on you, and trying to maybe, I'm not trying to fill anyone's shoes, because that's the thought, isn't it, with our kids? It's like this person's trying to step into the shoes of someone that they don't. It's not, not their shoes to fill. So it's a tough one. It's a huge, huge question, huge conversation.
Yeah. It's interesting, when I was interviewing a woman, and it changed about blended family on not See Here Love, but I was co-hosting another show called Full Circle. And she said that she actually doesn't even say stepmom or stepdad. It's bonus mom and
Bonus.
bonus dad. Because they were
Right.
like, especially for kids, they already have a mom.
Yes.
Or they already have a dad. And so to get that, you know, depending on stage and age, but the confusion of it. So just like a, you know, bonus parent, or, you know, the kids called me Mel for so long. I said, hey, just call me Melinda. Because, you know, they were really close with their mom. And so, yeah, there's a lot of learning in that. It's been quite a journey. You know, I know there's a lot of people that are struggling, or some that are, it's been an easy, you know, transition. But I think what you've said, Nicole, about, you know, being patient, open communication. Yeah. Because a lot of people can write about things of how to do it, but your kids and your situations are different in so many ways, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah.
you know, in your bio and within your book, there's a lot about, you know, I love, you know, you're wanted, reclaiming the truth of who you are. As we finish up this conversation, what would be your encouragement to a woman who's, you know, has gone through what we've gone through and is really struggling with it, or somebody who's just really like, whether it's divorced or anything, but just has felt rejected and unchosen, you know, her whole life, for in many areas, at work, with her own family, her own family of origin, with friendships. Do we get into the church?
I know. Yeah.
That'll be another podcast we'll do. But I mean, so many places where people have been unchosen.
Yes.
And keep being unchosen. And on the flip side, we're, you know, there could be people who have unchosen people as well. Like, you know, when I was sitting there listening to it, it's kind of like, have I been on the other end of that to somebody?
No kidding.
And have been a part of that, right?
Yeah, it's good.
I know it's a big question, and we have a little bit of time, but I'd love for you to sort of do an encouragement to that person who's feeling that way today.
Well, first, I would say to you, if that's you, feeling unchosen, feeling that you haven't fit in or measured up, or that there's been circles closed in that you're not part of, or you've had someone who's supposed to love you well not love you well, my words would first be that I'm very sorry that happened, and that message, that unloving, unkind message, has been communicated to you somehow. And then I would challenge you to hold on to the truth about yourself, because what we know to be true about rejection is that the rejection act itself isn't often the problem. It's the interpretation that we give the rejection, what we assume it means about ourselves. And so that goes back to, you know, Melinda, what you said earlier about the language. So if someone turns their back on me, I own that as about something about myself. But what we know to be true is that we're just not rejectable. We're not rejectable. We're chosen. We're woven together. We are priceless. And so the message of the humans in your life that have harmed you, I want you to stand. I want to stand with you, stand against that, and in the knowing that there is nothing that anybody can do or say that changes your worth or your value in any way. So to be challenging that narrative in your head as best as you can. And so on the heels of that, then I would also go back to one of my favorite women in the Bible, the Samaritan woman at the well. And I identify very closely to this woman. And the life that she lived, we can assume probably was full of rejection. It was full of rejection. And she, you know, that she'd been married 5 times. We know that at the time that men could divorce women for any reason. They didn't like what she cooked. They didn't like it. This woman has probably lost husbands to death, probably lost husbands to divorce. She would have lost social circles. And she was making her way to the well in the middle of the day because that was when other people wouldn't have been going. So I imagine the shame was thick for this woman. And I cannot wait to have coffee with her one day, because what we know to be true is that Jesus showed up, waited for her, right? He rerouted his plans. He waited for her at the well, sent the disciples off to town, and he waited one-on-one for one-on-one time with the Samaritan woman. That's how important she was to him. And he waited for her. And she came in one conversation, just who knows, whether it was 10 minutes or an hour with Jesus, it doesn't even matter. One conversation with Jesus, and her entire life changed. And she
Mm.
went back, she left her jug at the well, she ran back. I can just picture her holding her dress. She ran back to the community, and many people were saved that day because of her testimony. All she needed was that time with Jesus. And in my experience, that's where we get filled up. That's where we start to really understand who we are.
Mm. Nicole, beautiful. This conversation really encouraged me. I think when you meet someone that's kind of gone through the same things, it just sort of automatically feels this kindred spirit, this connectedness. And I just felt that after this. I'm like,
Mm,
it was good. It was good to kind of share a bit of the journey. I mean, there's so much more we could
yeah,
do,
yeah,
5-hour podcast and interview, but yeah, it's great. And it's great that like it's amazing. I've never met you. I've
yeah.
never connected in this way. And so I think I love that when I meet new people. And I know that you reached out on our See Her Love website, which was
Mm-hmm.
awesome, and that I was getting those messages, and I go to my coordinator Kelly like, please connect with her, check this out, she looks amazing. And so I mean, you know what I mean, like, I mean, and so for all the people that do send messages to websites, there are people that do read them.
Yes,
So
yes,
keep
I'm
doing it.
so
If you don't
grateful.
hear, right? If you don't hear for a while, we do read them. So don't give up. If you're trying to get in touch with somebody, you just
Yeah,
never know.
you
But
guys
that's
have
how
been
it happened.
amazing. Yeah, it was.
And
It
I'm
was
so
awesome.
glad, so glad. And so Nicole Langman, thank you so much. I know here that you have a book. The book is called You Are Wanted, Redeeming the Truth of Who You Are. Is that right?
You are wanted, reclaiming the truth of who you are.
Of who
Yeah,
you are. Yeah, excellent. And your practice is up near Barrie, which is for some people north of Toronto, correct?
that's right. Yeah.
Okay. And your website for people to connect with you?
Yeah, NicoleLangman.com.
Nice and simple.
Yeah, nice and simple.
Amazing. Well, Nicole, I hope you have a wonderful summer, that you will be strengthened
Yes.
in, the power of God's Spirit, and
Mm,
in the sweetness and kindness of his words and life,
mm.
that Jesus would continue to inspire you as you follow him and are led by him. So we're cheering
Thank
you
you,
on in all that
Melinda.
you do. I know that we'll connect again, but thank you so much for being on the show today.
Melinda, thank you. Bless you. Thank you for this.